Welcome back to the Social Currency Marketing Podcast. Thanks for being here. I'm Tuck Ross, and joining me, as always, is my good friend, Jess Jensen. Jess, how you doing this week?
I'm good. So today, we are talking social shopping, and it's all about context. Tuck, where do you want to start?
Well, I think let's start with the platforms that I think are really doing this really well right now, and it's Instagram and Pinterest. And going back to what we've referenced, some of the publicly available numbers, Instagram over 1 billion daily active users and 400 million watching stories every day. Pinterest numbers are pretty impressive as well, especially as they're marching toward the IPO this year. 250 million daily active users, and an interesting stat, 2 million users saving shopping pins daily. And I think, taking that a little bit further, 60% of Insta users saying that they learn about products on the app, with 75% of Insta users taking actions like visiting a site, telling a friend, or something else about seeing a post on Instagram. So there's really a lot of this concept about what could these platforms become if they actually wanted to take shopping to the next level.
Yeah. And, we've talked a lot about Instagram. We've mentioned Pinterest. As you said, likely IPOing this year, 2019. We've also referenced this in our episode 28, so you can check that out if you want to kind of start from the beginning. But definitely these are two that share this visual first nature in common. So to me, it's really logical. This is where commerce is going to start.
Yeah. So on Instagram, where 34% of daily users ages 13 and older have already purchased products based on a recommendation from an influencer blogger, we're now seeing the launch of Instagram Checkout. And if you haven't seen that come through, it's a new feature that's part of Instagram, and it's an extension of what they've basically taken as those shoppable little dots on each image. You may have seen those as you scroll through your feed. And now they've formalized that into a product, which is really slick. So you see those dots, you touch the dots, it pops a little box that shows you the name of the product and the price point. You touch on that. And actually inside Instagram now, it doesn't even take you outside to a different site. Inside Instagram, it allows you to add to cart in a native experience, check out with PayPal functionality, and then actually be able to receive updates about your shipment and product status right in the app as notifications, which is so cool, so seamless, and so impressive, right? That they're actually going to this level of integration for retail shopping.
Yeah, it's amazing, to your point, how seamless it is. And I think this is still in a bit of a beta, isn't it? Isn't there like something under 30 brands are actually able to access this quite yet?
Yeah, I think it's coming soon for everyone. They've really been kind of launching pieces of this incrementally, but really big news, not only for Instagram, but also for PayPal to be the major partner of this platform coming out the door. I think one of the stats that we saw from eMarketer in some of the pieces that we're reading is that social media is actually growing the fastest in terms of visit share referrals, with 110% growth in 2018. That's just growing more. Obviously, all those links are going off platform, right? And so as Instagram looks to become larger in the space and maintain more engagement, especially within the app, it makes sense for them to create this native experience that sits within Instagram itself and not driving people off platform, even though Instagram is still obviously massive and ramping around discovery for product.
Yeah, and we've used this word frictionless, which is, I feel like, such a hot word these days, in a couple of episodes in the past. But that's really what I see this being. It's continuing to remove the, quote, friction of shopping. So first, there was just getting comfortable with e-commerce, right? There was a time when that was still kind of foreign for a lot of people. Putting my credit card in, that might be scary. Then there was, is it mobilely enabled, right? I can do things on my desktop, but I get on my phone and it's ridiculous and it's not resizing and it's not built for mobile. Now we've passed those hurdles, both psychologically and from a technology and design perspective. And, really now the issue is I have to do too many clicks. I have to leave the environment, which is where I think we get this word contextual shopping or contextual commerce, the idea that I'm in the middle of an environment that I really am enjoying and perhaps perusing various photos or visuals of things that I like, whether that's, again, food, fashion, whatever. And I don't need to leave it. I can actually do everything within that context that I already am in.
Yeah, it's such a good point. This contextual commerce buzz phrase that's starting to catch on about it being so native to the experience that you're in, and a lot of it is because, like we talked about most recently, especially on the eMarketer report with the drive of influencers. I mean, what's your perspective here in terms of how influencers are helping drive this?
Right. Well, one of the examples that was a tactic, but I think a really smart one around influencers driving commerce is the notion of outbound links from Instagram stories. And it's something, frankly, I haven't actually delved into, and I intend to, so not just commissioning social influencers to actually build great content and kind of drive those top of the funnel metrics like awareness and association, but actually drive off of, say, Instagram stories, where with over 10,000 followers, you can outbound link to a .com environment if needed. But again, more and more with what Instagram is putting in place with PayPal, perhaps that'll all just happen within stories.
Yeah. It's funny you think about very traditional TV model of product placement and how shill that was back in the day. But it's almost like that model's revived itself in a lot of ways with, looking at authentic influencer types who are known for a very specific thing and the authority with that, and then being able to communicate around a product or service and sharing their knowledge, expertise, how that's part of their lifestyle and whatnot, and being able to communicate that in a way that makes people maybe want to purchase it, and being able to now do that specifically in the platform, especially with Instagram, but also with Pinterest, where shopping pins available, people assembling everything from wardrobes to room designs to all kinds of inspiration. It's really thinking about how are you defining yourself with brands and products and putting yourself contextually in that space and understanding, this is cool. This person helped me understand how to do this. Maybe I do want to buy that because it fits as part of my lifestyle and who I am authentically. I
mean, it goes back to the discussions we've had about influencer marketing. People inherently trust other people more than they do large companies and brands. So yes, there's definitely, a growing complexity around influencer marketing because of all of the fake followers and the celebrity culture and all that. But I still think that apples to apples, people are going to trust humans over brands. So influencers already like Instagram anyway, for lots of other reasons. Plus, they're also more trusted. You combine that with Instagram putting in this contextual commerce capability. That was 3 C's in a row. Say that 3 times fast.
Oh, yeah, that's good. Triple C.
Yeah, so I think it's just getting easier and easier to buy, again, within the context or within the environment that you find yourself. And by the way, that word contextual commerce is also being used to speak about audio, which we've touched on in past episodes as well, whether that's a Google Smart Home display or whether it is Alexa with the Amazon-enabled devices. But the idea of being able to just call out, order more Cheerios, Alexa, that's contextual commerce as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's thinking about whatever happens in the moment in the context of what you're doing to be able to do that. But I think to your point of bringing up Alexa, right, it makes me think about where these platforms are going ultimately. And a lot of this, starts to put them in the way of, and Instagram being owned by Facebook intentionally, puts them in the way of other larger e-commerce platforms. And, when you look at sort of where Shopify is going and how they receive traffic from these different social platforms and what we just talked about in terms of social share, visit share increasing exponentially year over year. You really start to think about Instagram, Pinterest. How do these start to become another version of maybe what Amazon is, right? Because the content is so interesting. It's all about discovery. Instead of ad interrupting you, you're actually engaging with and wanting to read that content, seeking out that content, and spending time with it, whether it's enjoyable or it's beautiful, and really saying, this is something that is meaningful to me, and I want to associate it by buying it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And, going back to Pinterest, I know we spent a fair amount of time on Instagram throughout many episodes. It's obviously, one of the hottest, if not the hottest social media platform out there. And we touched on, again, back in episode 28, how Pinterest doesn't even really define themselves as a social media platform. They think of it as more of a discovery tool. Again, looking at perhaps Amazon as a competitor and even Google. But one of the other interesting things that it talks about in this Digiday article, which we read to kind of prep for this discussion, was a little bit of the psychology behind how people feel when they spend time on Instagram versus Pinterest. And, Pinterest obviously positions itself from a positive perspective, but it talks about how people go to Pinterest to really discover and have fun, and it's a very positive environment. And there's sort of, I'll extrapolate here, like not necessarily the social pressure that I think many of us feel with the life of perfection that we find on Instagram. So interesting to see how Pinterest is trying to kind of distance itself a little bit from from the social pack.
Yeah, it is interesting. And I think there's a lot more capability in what Pinterest has to offer with a lot of what I've seen in the e-commerce background. I love the fact that Pinterest has the fact that there's out of stock, information and more dynamic product updates in terms of colors and styles and different, availability items, which are huge advantages for someone that wants to participate in that space. But again, it's very different in terms of that engagement level of what you see on an Instagram, where there's much more love and potentially affection because you see that person more specifically in Instagram, where Pinterest, the user or, the profile is a little more hidden, and it's more about the products and the pieces that you're seeking out for inspiration.
Yeah, good point. Now, you've got some good e-commerce background with some of the retail brands that you've worked for, and probably more than I do, frankly, because it's been a while since I was in that space, that consumer-facing space. Are there any examples from your past where you wish you'd had this kind of contextual commerce capability, or it would have been easier to kind of connect the dots through the marketing funnel?
It's funny. I throw back to when I was at one of my earlier businesses and launching some of the first Facebook programs for that business at the time. This is over 10 years ago now, and pitching that Facebook was actually going to be a social shopping platform. And that was a new term that was very early. And no one believed it, right? No one believed that anybody would buy anything off of any platform, nor would there be any capability to do such a thing. And candidly, there wasn't really a good tie-up until now. There's not really been an easy, use the word seamless. There's not really been that easy way to do that until now. And everything from QR codes to these shoppable different links as part of the platforms, they've still essentially functioned like traditional digital advertising. But I think more of these native integrations and some of the innovation around the product, even Pinterest noting that they, in every month, there's 600 million visual searches through Lens. And that's a big piece that Google's trying to take advantage of too, where people actually hold their phone up to something, especially a product, and try and either get more information or see where they can buy it. It's very cool to see that capability come to life. I would have loved to have those back then, but I think it's such a huge opportunity now for big businesses that have the capability and obviously the advertising dollars to be able to push this, but also for the small entrepreneur, right? And you look at a lot of these startups and single product entrepreneurs or ones that have a small portfolio, or especially like a clothing or beauty brand, they are blooming and growing, and they are driving velocity with just one platform. They don't need a full ad stack. They don't need everything set up because they can get not only instant visual, instant branding, that influencer awareness. They can also do all their retargeting, all their audience profiling, all their segmentation within the Facebook, especially platform. And I think Pinterest is getting there. But that is what is so cool, is that you don't have to tie 12 different things together now. If you're new, you could really do it all in one place.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I'm glad you brought that up because, again, I know a lot of our audience are potentially entrepreneurs, small business owners, maybe even folks getting started. And trying to navigate the digital marketing landscape can be overwhelming, no question, partly because it changes all the time. And yet another change, what we're talking about right here, this idea of contextual commerce and social shopping is another evolution. But this makes a ton of sense. And again, even if you're just a smaller, maybe it's a food delivery service, I get lots of those ads on Instagram, and I'm I'm pretty sure that many of them are startups and not, not giant conglomerates. So kind of good testimony to that lots of consumer facing, especially more retail oriented products and services could do really well just on Instagram, like you said, and maybe just start there and see what happens. And if it doesn't prove fruitful, you could go beyond. But I think the other piece too is this notion of Pinterest again, kind of trying to pull apart from the Instagrams and the Facebooks, kind of saying, hey, no, we're not that. We're looking more at Amazon or Google as our competition, which seems kind of crazy at first blush. Like Amazon is, gigantic, as is Google. But what's interesting is this idea of that Pinterest, people spend such large amounts of time. And again, it has perhaps more of that fashion orientation that you might not necessarily look for on Amazon, which leads me to this other discussion we were having on Twitter a couple weeks ago, commenting on the video from one of my favorites, as you know, Professor Galloway at NYU, and his repeated prediction about Amazon acquiring Nordstrom. And so it kind of makes you start to think about, like, all right, that's a commerce play. That's a high fashion play. Maybe it's not so crazy to think that Pinterest and Amazon could be competitors, because maybe that's one other approach that Amazon could use to kind of squash the higher end shopping that people might be looking for at Pinterest.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, Google's done really well with a lot of their productization and bringing products, especially not only into Google, but also into YouTube now. I think Amazon has had a hard time. They've introduced some of those visual shopping, what I'd call the new visual merchandising type tools, but no one goes to Amazon to just kind of browse like that, right? It's not interesting because it's just all product, right? And so I think people are more surgical with Amazon in general. But I think the interesting thing about, especially in Instagram or even a Pinterest, but maybe more Instagram, is that impulse, that kind of end cap mentality that someone's going through. The content is interesting. It is immersive. It's what they care about. And the content and the people are there and the products as content, and people are engaged with it. And in the moment, especially if it's built in and your card's already in there, I mean, it takes 3 seconds to check out. Why wouldn't you do that? You don't even have to flip to another app like you would if you were like, oh, let me remember to write that down. I got to go do this. I got to go to Amazon. I got to go to the store, whatever. It's already built in, which I think is really the opportunity there. And going back to what you had stated earlier about is Facebook becoming WeChat. I mean, that's how it's functioning in other countries, right? Like especially in China, WeChat is integrated. You've got commerce built in and it's just native to the experience. And I think that's really the point of contextual commerce, is that it is right there and able for you to kind of grab onto it and not even think about the purchase because the transaction's almost invisible.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've mentioned this in past episodes, the idea that the transactional part of shopping is not always so fun. It's a little more utilitarian. And so the more that can both be brought into the platform, so you're just having to click fewer places and not having to leave your environment, but also just kind of the more fun you can make that, the lighter weight that transaction can be, the more likely people are going to buy. I mean, it's just lower barrier to entry.
So let me ask you about attribution, because I think this is one thing that's really interesting about this. You and I were just chatting before we jumped on here about, what value are you driving from social? Is there ROI that you're able to prove, or is it just a branding exercise, top of funnel? What are your thoughts on attribution here? Do you think it's going to help?
100%. And again, right now we're a little bit more focused in this conversation on consumer-facing brands, which is almost always easier to attribute back to marketing because of the fact that there's fewer layers. But for example, this Motley Fool article that we were reading in prep for this discussion, obviously they're looking at Pinterest from a financial perspective. And one of the things they talk about is that Pinterest is offering advertisers the ability to reach consumers at every part of the funnel, the sales funnel, that is. So awareness, which is the top, often consideration, which is somewhere in the middle, then usually sales or conversion, which is toward the end. And so I love the idea of being able to transact through social, whether that's on Pinterest, Instagram, or maybe something else down the road, because it really clearly shows business impact. And Lord knows, for those of us who've been in digital marketing and even the social media aspect of that, this has been sort of the cross that we've had to bear for a decade, is Show me how the money you're spending on all these, fluffy social channels are actually helping my business. Well, boom. I mean, if I can transact within the platform, there's no more direct sales numbers than that.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with you. I think it's going to be so helpful. And not only just from the fact that a brand can see everything in one place, because they're going to be able to see their ad spend, the traffic, the audience, the revenue and related product sales as part of that, likely all, in the same dashboard. I think the other piece is that you're going to be able to have attribution finally for what influencers are going to be able to attribute, or even other affiliates as part of that program that are assisting with your sales, not just what you're driving directly to. So it's this power of the platform to be able to combine not only the D2C business that you have, but also what others, your affiliates, your influencers, and other assistants for your sales are able to do for you as well.
Yeah. And, as you were just talking, I was thinking about this, and having worked for most of my career for large companies, in some ways, if you're a small business owner listening and you're scratching your head trying to say, what's the key takeaway? What does this mean for me and my business right now? In some ways, you're sort of free from a lot of the legacy that large companies bear, right? Because if you've been in the marketing space, or, you've had even periods of larger budgets, it's very likely that you've done a lot of the traditional, quote, ATL, or above the line, as it used to be called, whether that's print ads, whether that's out of home, even broadcast or radio back in the day, banner ads online, all that stuff. And if you're kind of coming in now, or the last year or two, you've got a new business and not a huge budget, if you can just laser focus on a couple key digital platforms, maybe Instagram's one, maybe Pinterest is one, maybe couple that with a little bit of search. In some ways, like you said, I love the word surgical, although I know you're referencing Amazon, but I think it applies to this conversation as well. Like, you can kind of eliminate a lot of that legacy waste and just experiment with a couple of digital platforms and see what works for you.
Yeah, fully agree. So takeaways here, right? If you're small, like you said, you can be really tight with your budget, do a really good pilot, figure out what works, and then just spend the time here, because this could be your one platform, especially for that type of brand, which is engaging with influencers, highly visual, home, style, beauty, whatever it is, especially D2C, going to work really well here. And if you're a big brand, I mean, wow, the budget you could do, especially you could drive a bus through this, right? Like, this is a massive opportunity. And I think Instagram for sure right now, but if you look at where Pinterest is going to go, especially when they go IPO, they're going to have so much pressure to drive revenue that they're going to be innovating, I think, even faster now, which gives another big opportunity for that platform, knowing that Amazon has tried to copy them and failed. And they've got a good competitive stance, I think, because they're so different than the other platforms out there, to really have an opportunity in this space as well.
Yeah, and guess what? It sometimes, like lots of things, there's pros and cons, double-edged sword. It can feel, again, daunting and overwhelming as a person who, again, is starting up a business, or maybe doesn't have a digital marketing background. So many platforms. And then outside of social, you've got, of course, all the traditional digital, there's search and influencers, and oh my gosh, where do I start? But guess what? It's actually really good for us as marketers and business owners and folks that are managing the P&L to see that things like Pinterest are rising, right? Like new platforms. We talked about TikTok a little bit. And so the notion that there's some competition and that the digital landscape is not stagnant, because all of that competition and all of those sort of folks rising up are going to drive, better ad targeting, perhaps less expensive rates in some cases, more unique product development, like this commerce piece that we're talking about right now with this combination with PayPal. All that stuff's going to be driven out of competition. So ultimately, while it's a little messier, I think it's a really good thing for marketers and business owners.
It is. I mean, they're all fighting to compete to own part of your wallet. And especially in, the consumable product space, durable goods, whatever it is, Amazon, Google, Facebook, Pinterest being a player there, even Snapchat, right? And all of them trying to figure out, how do I sell something? How do I enable a business or a brand to engage here and make that attribution so that they actually care and want to spend the dollars with me? So I think it's an exciting time. Like you said, there's no legacy right now. If you're jumping in, there is nothing but opportunity, because there are so many interesting ways to drive a sale.
Yep. So if this was helpful to you and you want to get a little more social currency, subscribe. anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play. And you can get notified every Monday when we drop a new episode. You can also hear from us directly by signing up for our weekly newsletter at info@socialcurrencyshow.com. And of course, you can always find Tuck and I individually on Twitter at Tuck Ross or at Jessica K. Jensen. So one last cool thing that we're experimenting with, we've kicked off a YouTube channel. So we'll link to that in the show notes. We'd love to get your feedback. If it's fun to listen to things with an image or a visual, let us know. We're always experimenting, just like we're asking you to do. We're doing it ourselves. As always, Tuck, it was great to chat with you.
Good chat with you too, Jess. Thanks so much.
All
right, guys. We'll see you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye. Welcome back to the Social Currency Marketing Podcast. Thanks for being here. I'm sorry. I'm Jess Jensen. And joining me is my friend. Sorry, I had to reverse it. All right, starting over. Don't read that.